My wife secretly took $51,000 from our daughter's wedding fund to cover her parents' debts. I never thought I'd be the guy to share his family drama with the world, but here I am, wondering how my life took this turn. It all started last Thursday when I decided to check the savings account Sarah and I had carefully built over the years. That account wasn't just a pile of cash. It was a dream, Emma's dream. We'd promised our daughter a beautiful wedding someday. And $51,000 was a solid step toward keeping that promise. When I logged in, my heart sank. The balance stared back at me, almost mocking in its emptiness. $278. I refreshed the page twice, thinking it was some kind of glitch. No way could that much money disappear without either of us noticing. But the number didn't change. It felt like a slap in the face, like my entire world had just tilted slightly off its axis. My first instinct was to blame the bank. Maybe there was a security breach, some kind of fraud. That's what people always say, right? You hear stories on the news about hackers draining accounts. I thought, this can't be us. We're careful. We're responsible. Without hesitation, I called the bank's customer service. I spent the next 30 minutes on hold, trying to ignore the pit in my stomach. When I finally got through, the representative was polite but firm. No, there was no mistake. The funds were withdrawn in a single transaction months ago. Months ago. My mind raced. How did I miss that? I checked statements regularly, didn't I? The representative read off the details of the withdrawal. A large transfer authorized by an account holder. Only Sarah and I had access. That detail hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't hackers and it wasn't fraud. It was us. More specifically, it was her. I've been married to Sarah for 25 years. She's always been practical, grounded, the kind of person who keeps every receipt and knows the exact date of our insurance renewals. This didn't make sense. There had to be an explanation, something I was missing. Maybe she'd moved the money to another account for safekeeping or found a better interest rate. But why wouldn't she tell me? We shared everything, at least. That's what I thought. I stared at my phone, the bank's words still ringing in my ears. I wanted to confront Sarah immediately, but she wasn't home. She'd left early that morning for yoga, her usual Thursday routine. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but my mind was already running wild. What could she possibly need $51,000 for? And why would she take it without discussing it with me first? I tried to think rationally. Maybe it was something for Emma, something Sarah thought was too important to wait. But that didn't add up either. Emma was in college, busy with finals, and we'd already covered her tuition for the semester. There were no medical emergencies, no surprise expenses that I knew of. And if there were, wouldn't she have told me? We'd always prided ourselves on being a team, on making decisions together. That's what marriage is supposed to be, right? The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. Sarah's been acting different lately. Not drastically, just little things. She's been taking longer trips to the store, spending more time on her phone, and brushing off my questions with vague answers. I chalked it up to stress or midlife restlessness, but now it felt like there was a bigger picture I couldn't see. I went back to the account history, combing through every transaction like a detective at a crime scene. Nothing else seemed unusual, no recurring payments or suspicious activity. It was just that one massive withdrawal, a glaring red flag in an otherwise ordinary timeline. Hours passed, and I couldn't shake the growing tension in my chest. My wife, my partner, the mother of my child. What had she done? And why? I didn't want to think the worst, but the worst was all I could think. When Sarah finally walked through the door, smiling and chatting about her yoga class, I felt like I was staring at a stranger. I couldn't bring myself to ask her yet, not because I didn't want answers, but because I wasn't ready to hear them. Instead, I plastered on a smile and waited, the weight of the secret between us growing heavier by the minute. How do you ask someone you've loved for decades why they betrayed your trust? Or worse, how do you prepare yourself for the answer? Dinner that evening was tense, even though I tried to keep things normal. The weight of my discovery sat in the pit of my stomach like a stone. Sarah hummed softly as she plated the food, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. But as we sat down, I realized I couldn't keep the question locked away any longer. My words cut through the small talk like a knife. "Why did you take the money from Emma's wedding account?" Her face froze mid-smile, and for a moment, the room felt eerily silent. Sarah's hands trembled as she placed her fork down, and I could see the panic flash across her eyes. She didn't deny it. Instead, she took a deep breath. As if preparing for a confession she'd rehearsed 1,000 times in her head. She admitted she had withdrawn the money, but what came next shook me even more. Sarah explained that her parents were in deep trouble. Months ago, they had received a notice from the IRS about unpaid taxes that had ballooned into an insurmountable debt. If they didn't pay, they risked losing their home, the same house Sarah grew up in. It wasn't just a financial problem. It was an emotional anchor for her, a place tied to countless memories and family traditions. She admitted she didn't know how to tell me. Sarah had hoped to find a way to replenish the account before I noticed, but time ran out. Her parents' desperate pleas and the threat of foreclosure left her feeling like she had no choice. To her, family always came first, and she thought I'd understand once she explained. But I didn't, at least not right away. I couldn't wrap my head around her decision to act alone, to gamble with the future we'd carefully planned for Emma. That money wasn't just numbers in a bank account. It was a promise. And Sarah had broken it without so much as a discussion. Anger bubbled up inside me, and for the first time in years we argued. Not a petty disagreement, but a raw, emotional confrontation that tore through the fragile fabric of our trust. I reminded her of the sacrifices we'd made to save that money, of the moments we'd dreamed about Emma's wedding together. How could she take all that away without even asking? Sarah, through tears, defended her actions. She said she'd always believed in putting family first, even when it meant making tough decisions. She thought she could shoulder the burden alone, sparing me the stress and guilt of saying no to her parents. But in trying to protect me, she'd only created a rift between us. I felt torn. On one hand, I understood her desperation. Her parents had been kind and generous to us over the years, always supportive when we needed them. But on the other hand, her choice had betrayed our partnership. Marriage, to me, meant facing problems together, not making unilateral decisions that could shatter the foundation of our relationship. The argument left us both emotionally drained. Sarah retreated to our bedroom, and I stayed in the kitchen, staring blankly at the uneaten food on my plate. My mind raced with questions. How would we explain this to Emma? Could I forgive Sarah for what she'd done? And most importantly, where did we go from here? Later that night, lying in bed beside her, the silence was deafening. Neither of us knew what to say. I wanted to reach out, to find a way back to the unity we once had, but the betrayal was too fresh. I needed time to process, to figure out how we could rebuild what had been broken. The next day, I knew we couldn't keep this from Emma forever. She'd trusted us to safeguard her future, and now that trust was hanging by a thread. But I also knew Sarah's intentions, however misguided, came from a place of love. It didn't make the situation easier, but it added layers to the complexity of our predicament. As I drove to work that morning, my thoughts kept drifting back to the night before. This wasn't just about money. It was about trust, communication, and the fragile balance of family loyalty. I realized that, sooner or later, we'd have to face the consequences together, both with Emma and with each other. What I didn't know yet was how Emma would react. She wasn't a child anymore, but this would test her faith in us in ways I couldn't predict. Would she see Sarah's actions as a noble sacrifice, or would she feel betrayed like I did? The uncertainty gnawed at me, a constant reminder that the hardest conversations were still ahead. Facing Emma with the truth was a moment we both dreaded, but knew we couldn't avoid. That evening, Sarah and I sat her down in the living room, the weight of our secret looming over the three of us like a dark cloud. Emma's cheerful demeanor faded as soon as she saw our serious expressions. She knew something was wrong, and I braced myself for her reaction. When we told her about the money, her response was immediate and visceral. Her face turned red, and tears welled up in her eyes before she could even speak. The betrayal she felt was palpable, almost suffocating. She asked how we could let this happen, why we hadn't talked to her before making such a monumental decision about something that meant so much to her. Her voice cracked as she reminded us of all the times she'd talked about her dream wedding, the one thing she'd been looking forward to since she was a little girl. Sarah tried to explain. She recounted her parents' desperate situation, their fear of losing their home, and her belief that family loyalty required her to step in. She spoke about how she thought Emma would understand, how she'd planned to find a way to make it right. But Emma wasn't having it. She said Sarah's intentions didn't matter because the result was the same. The money was gone, and her dreams were now out of reach. For the first time in her life, Emma looked at her mother not with admiration, but with resentment. She accused Sarah of prioritizing her own family over her daughter's future. The word stung, and Sarah's tearful apology only seemed to fuel Emma's anger. She refused to accept that her mother had acted out of love, insisting instead that it was a betrayal of trust, one that would take years to mend, if it ever could be. As Emma's anger turned toward me, I felt a new wave of guilt wash over me. She blamed me for not keeping a closer eye on the account, for not protecting the money that we'd all agreed was meant for her wedding. I wanted to defend myself, to tell her that I'd been blindsided just like she had, but it felt hollow. She was right. I should have noticed something was wrong months ago. Instead, I let it slip past me, assuming everything was fine. The room was thick with tension, and I could see the growing divide between us all. Emma finally stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. Sarah and I sat in silence, the echoes of Emma's accusations ringing in our ears. The weight of the situation felt unbearable, and I began to wonder if we'd ever be able to repair the damage we'd caused. In the days that followed, Emma barely spoke to us. She avoided meals, stayed locked in her room, and only emerged when she needed to leave for class. The house felt empty, even though we were all still under the same roof. Sarah tried several times to reach out, but Emma's responses were curt and cold. It was clear that her trust in us, especially in Sarah, had been deeply shaken. I spent my nights lying awake, thinking about how we could fix this. Emma deserved to feel secure, to believe that her dreams still mattered. But no matter how many solutions I tried to imagine, none of them felt adequate. The money was gone, and the reality of our choices was something we couldn't escape. What made it worse was knowing that we'd failed her in more ways than one. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the broken promises, the lack of communication, and the betrayal of the values we'd tried to instill in her. We'd always taught Emma to value honesty and transparency, and now she saw us as hypocrites who couldn't follow our own advice. I knew we couldn't leave things like this forever. We had to find a way to rebuild her trust, to show her that her dreams still mattered to us as much as they did to her. But how? Every attempt to bridge the gap seemed to push her further away, and I feared that the longer this went on, the harder it would be to make things right. The situation had reached a breaking point. We were standing on the edge of a chasm, and if we didn't find a way to reach each other soon, I feared we'd lose Emma's trust for good. The silence in the house was unbearable, and I knew we couldn't go on like this. Emma's anger hung over us like a storm cloud, and Sarah's guilt weighed on her heavily. I decided it was time to take action. We couldn't change the past, but maybe we could salvage the future. One evening, after another tense day of barely spoken words, I suggested a plan. We needed to rebuild Emma's wedding fund together as a family. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but it was the only way forward I could see. I took responsibility for not noticing the missing money sooner and pledged to cut back on unnecessary expenses. Every extra dollar would go into a new fund, step by step. Sarah, visibly moved by my commitment, agreed to do her part. She began looking for a second job, something part-time she could manage in addition to her current work. It was a small step, but it showed she was serious about making things right. What surprised me most was Sarah's decision to come clean to her parents. She sat them down and admitted what she'd done, explaining that she'd used Emma's wedding savings to help them. At first, they were shocked, even upset. But as the gravity of the situation sank in, they began to understand the sacrifice Sarah had made for them. Her father, always a man of action, immediately suggested selling some of the family's heirlooms to help repay the money. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was a selfless one, and it showed just how much they wanted to make amends. When Sarah told Emma about her grandparents' offer, Emma was taken aback. She'd always loved her grandparents and knew how much their possessions meant to them. Seeing their willingness to part with those treasures for her sake softened her resolve, but it didn't erase the hurt. She appreciated the gesture, but the betrayal she felt still lingered like a wound that hadn't healed. In the midst of this, Emma's fiancé, Daniel, stepped in with his own solution. He told Emma they didn't need a lavish wedding to be happy. A simpler ceremony could still be beautiful and meaningful, and it would allow them to focus on starting their life together without the stress of rebuilding the fund. But Emma wasn't ready to let go of her dreams so easily. She'd spent years imagining her perfect day, and the thought of settling for less felt like giving up a part of herself. I could see the strain it was putting on her relationship with Daniel. He was trying to be supportive, but Emma's refusal to compromise left him feeling powerless. Their arguments became more frequent, and I worried that the tension in our family was spreading to their future together. It was a painful reminder of how far-reaching the consequences of our actions could be. Despite the setbacks, Sarah and I threw ourselves into the task of rebuilding the fund. Sarah took on extra hours at a local coffee shop, and I started picking up freelance work on the weekends. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a tangible way to show Emma that we were committed to making things right. Slowly but surely, the new account began to grow. It was a small glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak situation. At the same time, I worked to repair my relationship with Emma. I knew she needed to see that I was on her side, that I valued her dreams as much as she did. I started spending more time with her, listening to her ideas for the wedding, and helping her research venues that might still fit within a more modest budget. It wasn't the grand vision she'd had before, but it was a start. Through it all, Emma's feelings towards Sarah remained complicated. She appreciated the effort Sarah was making, but the betrayal still cast a long shadow. Forgiveness, if it came, would take time. The small gestures from her grandparents and the steady progress on the fund helped, but the pain couldn't be undone with money alone. The question that loomed over us was whether we could truly move past this as a family. Would Emma eventually see Sarah's actions as a mistake made out of love, or would the memory of the betrayal always linger between them? And what about Daniel? Could their relationship withstand the strain of all this turmoil? As the weeks passed, I began to see glimmers of hope. The tension in the house eased slightly, and Emma started to engage with us more, even if cautiously. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a step in the right direction. Still, the road ahead was uncertain, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest challenges were yet to come. As the weeks turned into months, the fractures in our family began to heal. Emma's anger, once fiery and all-consuming, softened into something more complex, a mix of understanding, sadness, and cautious hope. It wasn't a sudden transformation, but a gradual realization that Sarah's actions, while deeply flawed, came from a place of love. Daniel played a crucial role in helping Emma see this. His steady presence and gentle encouragement reminded her of what truly mattered. He told her that the grandeur of a wedding was secondary to the commitment it symbolized. Their love and the support of their family were the foundations of a meaningful life together. Those conversations planted seeds of perspective in Emma's heart, and slowly, she began to let go of the resentment she'd been holding on to. One evening, Sarah sat Emma down and apologized. Not the hurried, panicked apology she'd offered before, but a sincere, heartfelt admission of guilt. She explained her thought process, her fears, and how deeply she regretted breaking Emma's trust. Sarah promised to do everything in her power to make things right, not just with the money, but with the bond they shared. Emma listened, and though her response wasn't immediate forgiveness, there was a shift in her demeanor. It was a start. As a family, we made a new plan. The old wedding fund couldn't be replaced overnight, but we agreed to contribute what we could together. I took full responsibility for managing the account this time, ensuring transparency, and avoiding any future misunderstandings. Sarah committed to continuing her part-time job, and even Emma's grandparents insisted on helping with the repayments. It was humbling to see everyone rallying around this shared goal, each of us taking ownership of our mistakes and responsibilities. Emma eventually agreed to scale back her wedding plans. It wasn't an easy decision for her, but she made it on the condition that Sarah and I would fully support her vision within the new budget. This compromise became a turning point for all of us. It reminded us that the heart of the event wasn't in the extravagance, but in the love and unity it represented. As the preparations moved forward, the mood in the house shifted. The tension that had hung over us for so long began to lift, replaced by a sense of purpose. We spent weekends crafting decorations, researching affordable venues, and finding creative ways to make the day special without breaking the bank. These small acts of collaboration brought us closer, reminding us of what we'd almost lost. 6 months later, Emma's wedding day arrived. It wasn't the grand affair she'd once envisioned, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. The ceremony was held in a local garden, surrounded by friends, family, and an overwhelming sense of love. Even Sarah's parents, who had sacrificed so much to help, were there, their presence a testament to the power of forgiveness and unity. As Emma walked down the aisle, I couldn't help but feel a swell of pride and gratitude. She'd faced disappointment and heartbreak, but had emerged stronger, more grounded in what truly mattered. During her toast at the reception, Emma thanked everyone who had made the day possible. She looked directly at Sarah and me, her voice steady as she expressed her gratitude for our efforts to mend the rift and support her dreams. It was a moment of healing, a confirmation that our family's bond had not only survived but grown stronger through the trials we'd faced. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting on everything we'd been through. Financial crises have a way of exposing cracks in relationships, but they also present opportunities for growth. Our family had been tested in ways we never expected, and while the journey was painful, it forced us to confront our flaws and rediscover the strength of our connections. Sarah and I made a promise to each other that day, to be more honest, more open, and to face challenges together instead of alone. It wasn't just about avoiding future mistakes. It was about building a partnership that could weather anything. For Emma, the experience became a lesson in resilience and the importance of family, one that she carried with her as she began her new life with Daniel. Looking back, I wouldn't wish that kind of hardship on anyone, but I can't deny that it changed us for the better. It reminded us of what truly matters: love, trust, and the willingness to fight for the people who mean the most. In the end, it wasn't the wedding that defined us, but the journey we took to get there.
Bye-bye.